Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and today it's time to talk about my least favorite reads of 2021. This is of course the third video in my year-end wrap-up series. I have already done a video talking about or looking back at my stats and goals of 2021, and I've also already done a video talking about my favorite reads of the last year, so I will leave the playlist that has both of these videos linked down below and up there in case you haven't seen them yet. And after this video I will still upload one more video talking about my favorite rereads and also my favorite series, so I will have a very nice sandwich of positive, negative, positive. But today is, let's say, the meat of the sandwich. Today we're going to talk about the negative things, and because of that I feel the need to put a little disclaimer, and that is that in the past few years I've seen more and more people really upset about people talking about books that they didn't like, and so I want to put the disclaimer that I didn't like these books. It's nothing against you, they can be your favorite books of all time. I truly do not care. I cannot tell you how much I do not care if you like them or not, if you agree with me on this opinion or not. If you're interested in hearing my opinion, then you're welcome to stay. You're welcome after the video to talk with me in the comments. What were your opinions, why you like these books, why you maybe also didn't like these books. Keep it all civil. But if you're someone who simply doesn't like to see people talk negatively about books that you loved, then you're welcome to move on your merry way and watch my next video. Because this video then will not be for you. It's just the little disclaimer, because yeah, people can be way too salty about other people's opinions and it's making me salty, okay? But yeah, I actually had quite a hard time choosing books for this video. I mean, I did end up with quite a number. I think I ended up with like 13 books or something. I don't know, 13, 14 books. But the reason why I had a hard time choosing books for this video is because there weren't a lot of books that I definitively didn't like, where I would say, yeah, I definitely didn't like them, or they definitely disappointed me. And the reason for that is that, and I have talked about that before, I feel like I read too much last year, and so everything that wasn't like at the very bottom or at the very top just kind of ended up being smushed together in a big pile of ultimately meh books. And so I have some books here, but a lot of these books I don't even have that much to say about. They're just books where I'm like, yeah, they just stood out to me with how much they just didn't make me feel anything. That's a lot of these books. Then some of the books I have on this pile are books where I just really didn't have a good reading experience, because that was something else that happened to me, that I read so much that at some points, and they got more and more often in the second half of the year, but at some points I just stopped having the capability to interact with what I was reading. And so yeah, there were some very disappointing reading experiences because of that, even though the books themselves I do think are objectively well written, maybe even amazingly written. And so yes, because of that I also won't have a ranking in this video, so I will start with books that I do think are objectively well written and that I want to reread again and that I think I will love in the future, and I want to end with books that made me angry. So, you know, I will have, you know, the least bad books at the beginning and the worst books at the end. But overall, I'm just gonna go more by categories rather than a definitive ranking. Doesn't make sense. I hope it makes sense, but the intro is already way too long once again. And so let's start with the two books that I had where I think they are good books, but I sadly didn't have a good reading experience because I for some reason just couldn't engage with the book whatsoever. And both of these books are sadly anticipated releases, or were anticipated releases for 2021. The first I have is Son of the Storm by Sui Davis Okungbowa, which is the first book in the Nameless Republic. This book on paper should be everything that I'm excited for in fantasy. It is a fantasy written by someone who, first of all, as far as I know, did not grow up in the US, but he's from Nigeria, possibly. So he moves between Nigeria and Arizona, but he grew up in Nigeria, so that is also where a lot of the cultural influences in this book come from. It's a vibrant storytelling that doesn't follow traditional Western fantasy structures necessarily. You have incredibly interesting characters, social dynamics, world building, magic, like everything in this book should be something that I absolutely fall in love with. And I have fallen in love with in different cases this year with other books. However, when I picked this up, I for some reason just didn't have the brain power to engage with it and to properly follow the story and properly follow the world building. And I probably should have set it aside, to be honest, and just said, you know what, it's not for me right now. I will try again a few months later, or maybe, you know, next year / this year now, of course. But I didn't, and because of that, I just was left with this really disappointing reading experience, even if the book itself wasn't necessarily disappointing, or I can't judge if the book was disappointing or not. And I'm sorry, but my nose is really itchy. And so, yeah, I just didn't have a great reading experience. I do intend to reread this, at least when the second book comes out, which should be sometime this year, I believe. And so I hope I will then have the brain power to properly engage with it, because I do still have really high hopes for this on a reread. And the other book where I had a similar experience, which some of you might know which book I'm talking about if you've been on my channel in August, because I talked about that in my review of this book as well. By the way, once again, if I have reviews of any of the books I'm talking about, I will leave them linked down below and up there. But yeah, with this book, it was a similar experience. On the one hand, of me just not being able to engage with the book at the moment when I read it, and on the other hand, also just wrong expectations because of the marketing of the book. And the book I'm talking about is She Who Became the Sun by Shelley Parker Chan. The wrong expectations in terms of the marketing were because it was marketed as Mulan meets the Song of Achilles, which I think it's wrong on both accounts. I mean, I can see where it moves into territories or like Song of Achilles vibes. And by the way, if I expect something to be like something, I don't expect the story to be the same, but I expect it to give me the same feelings or the same vibes as the books that this says it was. So I don't expect the same as a retelling, where, you know, with Mulan meets the Song of Achilles, I might have expected a bit more of a Mulan story, which I didn't really think was there. It maybe was there a little bit in one of the other characters, but not with the character that's the main character. And with the Song of Achilles, I expected it to give me like similar tragic vibes, which was there a little bit at the end, and I think we might get more of that in the second book, hopefully. But with this first book, just, you know, throw the Mulan meets Song of Achilles out of the window. Just ignore that completely when you go into this. And so I think that was part of the reason why I had difficulty engaging with this story, but then also generally it just, once again, was the same deal as with Son of the Storm. And once again, this is a book that on paper should be perfect for me. It's historical fantasy, which I love. Instead of it including like full-on magic systems or something, which, you know, I can sometimes enjoy, I can sometimes leave by the side of the road, I'm fine with either. But instead of this having full-on magic systems, it's more just single magical elements that almost go more in the direction of mythological spiritual elements. So that's something that I really enjoy usually. There were discussions about gender identity in the context of this culture. So once again, there's just a lot of elements that should have made this ideal for me. Also, the writing is beautiful, but I just couldn't engage. whatsoever. And I was actually really happy that I didn't rate books in 2021, like I didn't give them star ratings, because in terms of my reading enjoyment I would probably have given this 3 stars, because intellectually I still realize that it's a well-written book. But I do think that this has the potential to be a 5-star for me, and we will get a second book. I think this will now be a duology in total, so I will reread it before we get the second book, and hopefully it will be a 5-star or a 4.5 star for me then. Next, I have 2 books where I don't think they are badly written books, they just really weren't for me. The first of those was The Midnight Bargain by C.L. Polk. The reason why this wasn't for me was because this is a fantasy romance story, but very, I don't know how to say it, 90s feminism? I don't know, and like there were important discussions had in this book, especially when it comes to bodily autonomy, where I do think these discussions are very important and where I will absolutely fight for those rights IRL, like in our world, in our politics. But there was just something missing for me in terms of these discussions and the way that they were like woven into the story, where instead of it making for an interesting story, for me it just came across really on the nose and sometimes a little bit preachy. And so really the only element that I enjoyed about this was the love interest, who I thought had a bit more nuance and didn't punch you in the face with the messaging, which I agree with all the messages of this book. So, you know, it's not like I'm like I disagree with anything that was said in the book, but overall it was just, yeah, also one of the main side characters, one of the women, I just really didn't like her because I thought her motivations were kind of not very clear, and she just was someone who only cared about her own freedom and would, you know, not care, like the freedom of the other women or of our main character would just be a price, an unfortunate price that would have to be paid. So yeah, I was just overall not very happy with what this book gave me. I still think that it's a good book for a certain type of readership. I don't exactly know what the type of readership is right now, but yeah, just wasn't for me. And then I have a book that is a German book that wasn't for me, but where I'm insanely happy that it exists, and that is Die Götter müssen sterben by Nora Bensko. The title would translate to The Gods Must Die. This is a German fantasy story, and within German fantasy and within German high fantasy, it's like we're always like, I don't know, 5 to 10 years behind on where the English or English-speaking publishing industry is in terms of diversity. And so there's this new like subgroup of authors, I would say, that count themselves as part of the progressive fantasy subgenre, I don't know what to call it, within German publishing or German-speaking publishing. So Austria as well as Germany. I don't know if Switzerland as well, how connected they are. And this is one of the books that was published under the progressive fantasy title in 2022. It's a retelling kind of, and we're following the Amazons, and we're following the Amazons as they prepare to ride to war to Troy. And so there once again was something with like wrong expectations, because German publishing has this thing where they put stuff on the back flap that only appears like in the last third at the earliest. Like I had another German publishing book where stuff was spoiled on the back that literally happened in the last 3 chapters, which, you know, is whatever. So that was one element that I just expected Troy to play a bigger role much earlier, but we spend our time kind of preparing to even travel to Troy and to introduce the characters and so on. So that's one part where I was a little bit disappointed. And then the other part is just that, you know, under the aspect that progressive fantasy within German publishing is rather new. A lot of the progressive parts, a lot of the representation, a lot of the diversity in this book was very on the nose. And so it's similarly to The Midnight Bargain, where I'm just someone, I enjoy subtlety in my books, and I enjoy diversity to be woven into the story in a way where it's there, but it's not on the nose. And with not on the nose, I don't mean in a way where it's like, no, the main characters aren't queer, but it's just side characters or whatever. No, the main characters can still be queer as fuck and loud and proud and there. But, you know, I don't need paragraphs upon paragraphs explaining to me what a non-binary person is, for example. And so I think this book is great for certain people, especially people who are new to diversity and who are new to diverse and different gender identities, because this book explains a lot of it and shows it lived and shows how these characters live with that. And something that I actually appreciated for myself is that for the first time in this book, I saw xenopronouns or alternative pronouns used in the German language, which, if you don't know, and if you're English, you don't know how lucky you are with they as a neutral pronoun. Because in German, everything is gendered. Literally everything. You cannot talk without gendering. It's impossible. It's absolutely impossible. And so seeing neopronouns or xenopronouns used in this book just really was educational for me, and so that's something that I really appreciated about this. But overall, as the story, I did not connect to too many of the characters. I thought my expectations that I had for the book weren't met, which again is more my fault than the book's fault, maybe marketing's fault. And then a lot of the world building was a little bit too on the nose for me, and too, well, maybe on the nose is the wrong way to say, too exposition dumpy for me, which I wasn't a big fan of. So yeah, just sadly had high expectations for this, also because the cover is absolutely beautiful, but it didn't meet my expectations. So next I will just very quickly go through a bunch of books where I mostly was like, yeah, I don't have many thoughts on this. It was just not for me, and I didn't enjoy these books, and yeah, it was whatever. The first was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. This was the first Agatha Christie that I read, and remember how I said that I had a lot of reading booktubers' favorite books in 2020 video books on my favorites list? Does that make sense? On my favorites list there were a lot of books that I read for my reading booktubers' favorite books of 2020 video. And well, one of the books from this video also ended up in my most disappointing books. I mean, maybe part of the problem was that, well, I forgot who was the murderer or who was the person doing the stuff, the killing. I forgot who it was, but I do know the story because we had it, or we set it up as a play in my high school, so I did know it, but yeah, just didn't enjoy it. Then next I have another classic, and that is 1984 by George Orwell. I already read Animal Farm by him in high school, and I also didn't like that. So I think first of all, George Orwell's writing just isn't for me. And then also the main character of this book was just horrible and boring, and I just really didn't like him. Continuing on, a book that would actually maybe have fit better into the previous category of books I didn't like, but that I still would recommend to some people, and that was For the Wolf by Hannah Witten. I don't know, this book just really didn't connect to me. Also, in terms of a Red Riding Hood retelling or Red Riding Hood inspired story, this just really missed its mark for me, because it's more a Beauty and the Beast retelling than a Red Riding Hood retelling. Because for Red Riding Hood you have a main character who's called Red, who has a cape that is red, and the main love interest is called the Wolf. That's literally it. In terms of the Beauty and the Beast retelling, you have a main character who has to go live with this person in a castle to save her family and to, you know, save a lot of people, and you have the Enchanted Forest, which I guess Enchanted Forest isn't necessarily Beauty and the Beast, but you know, it's part of that. It's kind of where the castle is. And so there were just a lot more elements there, but overall I just wasn't interested in the characters, and I was like, whatever. I'm gonna read the sequel to it because I'm still interested in that, but overall just didn't connect with me. Continuing on, I have some YA novels that I didn't enjoy, and let's start with Lost in the Netherwoods because I don't have this as a physical copy because I read it via audiobook, and so let's just talk about it first so I don't forget it like I did in every single wrap-up since I read this, I think in November or something. But yeah, Lost in the Netherwoods by Aidan Thomas. Really sad that I didn't enjoy it, or I wouldn't even say that I didn't enjoy it. It would probably be like a low 3-star book, but I really enjoyed Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas in 2020, and so I was very disappointed that I didn't enjoy their newest book. And the reason for that just is very weird. I think one part is that I might have enjoyed it more if I had read it physically rather than as audiobook, because this is a dark Peter Pan retelling, or it's a Peter Pan retelling. It's not too dark actually. And so Wendy is our main narrator within the story. However, the audiobook is narrated by a male voice, which threw me off. Okay, I didn't like the narrator whatsoever. Whatever. And then the second thing that it's just such a pet peeve, and it's like not important whatsoever, but for some reason this was the thing that upset me about the book, and that is that this book is set within our world. However, the Peter Pan stories like J.M. Barrie and Peter Pan does not exist within this world, or it only exists as stories that Wendy told her younger siblings. So Peter Pan exists as stories that Wendy told her younger siblings, but not as the actual novel slash play that was created at the beginning of the 20th century. And I don't know why, but for some reason that bothered me, and it makes sense. If you want to make a retelling, sometimes you just can't have the original story be something that exists within that world. But you know, you could just make it a bit less on the nose that it doesn't exist. And I'm trying to argue why it bothered me, but there's not really any arguments why it bothered me. It just did, okay? It just bothered me. We're gonna have to live with that. Then next I have The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna, which is the first book in a new duology, I believe, and this is also YA, and I just thought this was very simple YA. You know, it just... this confirmed all the prejudices I have why I don't enjoy YA all that much anymore, with the characters just being really simple and one-dimensional, with the world just being really simple, and like the world building not being all that great, and it just... it bored me. It is what it is, it bored me. And then I have two finals in series. The first is A Vows of Bold and Deadly by Bridget Camera, which was the third book in the Cursebreaker series. I honestly cannot even tell you what happened in this book anymore. I mean, book 2 already made it onto my worst books of 2020 list, so it's no surprise that this book is on this list. I wanted to finish the series anyway, also so I can have the pretty spines on my shelves, because I'm shallow. What can you say? So yeah, just didn't like it. And then lastly, before we get into the final books on this list, the last two categories, which is an author, and then also the two books that were the worst books of 2021 for me. But before we get into that, one last YA book, and that was The Bronzed Beasts by Roshani Chokshi. And yeah, I was just overall pretty disappointed by this finale. I really enjoyed The Gilded Wolves in 2019. It made it onto my favorites of 2019 list. I gave it 5 stars. I really enjoyed the dynamics between all the characters. I didn't like book 2 quite as much anymore, but I had hoped that the, you know, that the finale would bring it home and would be a, you know, what's it called? Solid. That's what I wanted to say. It would be a solid finale. But overall, the character dynamics that I fell in love with just weren't there anymore. The characters that I fell in love with just weren't there anymore. This finale for me felt oddly rushed and just not solid. I didn't like it. I was disappointed. So next, let's talk about the author that just disappointed me in 2021. And if you follow me on Twitter, you will know which author I'm talking about. I am talking about the author, well, I'm holding this the wrong way around. I am talking about the author who in 2020 I still called my favorite author of all time. Wow, how the turns have tabled. How the turns have tabled, indeed. I have 3 books to talk about by Brandon Sanderson. Let's start with Cytonic, which was the 3rd book in the Skyward series. I had really high hopes for this because I really enjoyed the 2 novellas that came out before this. However, this just wasn't for me. It basically, and I can't really talk about it without spoilers, so I won't, but it basically for me was a rehashing of the same plot that we had in the first 2 books, except with characters that weren't as lovable as our original crew, or even the crew that we got to see in book 2. It was also way shorter, like it was about 100 pages shorter than either book 1 or book 2, so we had less time to meet any of the new characters. So I really wasn't attached to them, then for reasons that I can't go into because of spoilers. Just Spence's character development in this book, or what was tried to do, what Brandon Sanderson tried to do with her character development, didn't work for me whatsoever. I thought it felt really flat. And yeah, overall there just were a lot of elements that really disappointed me about this. And so yeah, this book feels rushed. This book feels really rushed. Like, I get Brandon Sanderson is someone who can write very quickly, but you know, sometimes taking a little bit of time isn't a bad thing. That's what I would want to say to him. And now my battery is flashing, so I will change that before we continue on with the Cosmere entries on this list. Okay, so I am back. Next I have White Sand by Brandon Sanderson, which is his Cosmere graphic novel. And first of all, it's just a bad graphic novel. Like, the art might be pretty in single pictures, but for a graphic novel as a whole, it's mostly just really confusing. And also there's way too much text. The story doesn't feel thought through, and I know there's a lot of people arguing like, yeah, Brandon Sanderson wasn't as involved in this, he basically just gave the story to them a little bit, and then his, like, the people at the publisher created all of this. He still put his name on this, so I'm sorry, but Brandon Sanderson is at fault if this sucks quality-wise. But yeah, then there were also some pretty problematic elements in my opinion. Like, for example, I don't know, having all the people who are richer or upper class wear very Western inspired clothing. However, everyone who's not rich or upper class or like ruling or whatever, by the way, this is set in a world that's like in a desert world, and so everyone from lower classes is wearing clothes inspired by cultures from, you know, our desert settings, inspired by cultures and people living in the desert in our world. So yeah, that was just something that really rubbed me the wrong way, on top of this already being just bad as a graphic novel and bad as a story, and oh my god, I so did not care about anything. So yeah, anyway, moving on, we're just gonna ignore this, to be honest. And then lastly, I of course did my whole Cosmere reread in 2021, where I also read White Sand for the first time. And as a whole, I have to say that my reread was pretty disappointing. I didn't go out all happy now, getting a few more of the Cosmere connections. I instead just saw how similar a lot of the parts of world building are with Brandon Sanderson, and I saw how many big flaws Brandon Sanderson has. And I still would say that I enjoy him. Like, I'm still gonna buy future books by him. I still wanna see how a lot of his series ends, but also, like, let's just say I stopped going hard for him. And the main disappointment of my reread is the Wheel of Time. Why am I saying the Wheel of Time? The Stormlight Archive, which, you know, it being possibly my favorite series of all time last year. You know, last year, where at one point I said, maybe, just maybe, the Black Jewels isn't my favorite series, but actually the Stormlight Archive is. Yeah, well, it's not, okay? It's not, because, and I will at some point this year, with also some other people, possibly, or the input of some other people, make a video on everything that is wrong with Brandon Sanderson and Brandon Sanderson's writing. But my issue is, on the first hand, very objectively, that he just doesn't focus on the things that I have found interest me most about fantasy, namely the cultural, social aspects of fantasy, seeing how structures within different cultures work, within different societies work, seeing how those structures influence our characters and how our characters act. And Brandon Sanderson is just really bad at that, and he puts interesting ideas and tidbits into his stories, but once you try to dig deeper, there's nothing there anymore. Like, for example, the safe hand in the Stormlight Archive. Interesting idea. There's nothing done with it. At least, like, nothing considerable done with it. And then you just have the structural problems that low-key go into being problematic, especially the whole Kaladin Muash storyline, actually everything about Kaladin, Shallan being entitled as fuck constantly. I still love Shallan, but she's an entitled bitch. Sorry I have to say it like that. And so yeah, overall it just was a really unpleasant experience for me, and then yeah, it just, whatever. Don't want to talk about it anymore. I'm gonna have a whole video on that in the future. So 2 books left, and I'm gonna start with the one that doesn't have a shitty person as an author, even though you'd probably expect this book on my #1 spot of worst books this year. But that book is The Shadow of the Gods by John Gwynne, and you know, John Gwynne just has horrible fans, mostly. I did make a full rant review on this, where like every single dude bro commenting on this video misunderstood my point entirely that I made about this book, which, my nose is once again itchy. Which, yeah, led to multiple very hilarious comments on that video, and I'm just gonna quickly mention it once again here. First of all, that video, I don't know why it's so hard to understand that sometimes I phrase my opinions in a purposefully provocative way because it's fun, you know? But anyway, this book I just thought was capably written. It is what I said in my original video. I didn't dislike this book when I read it. I didn't dislike the characters. I thought the characters were all the same and overall pretty boring. There just was nothing about this book, the world building, anything that stood out to me. For my personal preference, there was too much focus on action scenes, which, you know, isn't the fault of this book. I just personally noticed also through this book, so I guess I should thank it, also through this book, that, you know, there's a reason why I tend to lean towards more political fantasy and more cultural fantasy, because I just prefer the intricacies of politics and of intrigues and of that type of stuff, of mysteries, a lot more to, you know, the straightforward punching each other in the face, which there was a lot of in this book, which nothing wrong with that, but I don't like it. And then I also criticized how non-diverse this book is, because I think there's not a single queer character and there's not a single non-white character in here, which again, I don't remember if I completely explained that in my video, but when it comes to diversity in books, it's something that I always look out for. So I will even criticize my favorite books if they don't have diversity. With my favorite books, it's usually like, I won't like them less if they don't have diversity, but if they have diversity, I will like them even more. And with books that I'm already feeling pretty meh about or that I don't like, usually if there's diversity in them, that gives me at least something to latch onto that I'm interested in. So even if I won't necessarily like them any better or think they're any better as books, at least my reading experience is somewhat more pleasant. And yeah, if they don't have diversity, it's just one among many minus points. And that's basically how I feel about this book. Like, it's not a bad book, it's just a really, really boring book. And the lack of diversity is one of the reasons. And also, oh my god, I said I got a lot of hilarious comments, but yeah, tell me in the comments down below if you want me to do a video reacting to the hate comments or discussion comments on that video, because the arguments some of the people use are just incredibly hilarious. And also the amount of times I was called racist for, you know, asking that maybe not all characters are white is also just pretty funny. Like, pretty funny. And so now we have come to the last book, which is The Betrayals by Bridget Collins. Now, for this one, I want to rant and I want to go into spoilers because, yeah, anyway. So if you still want to read this book, which, to be honest, I don't recommend because right out front, the author is a TERF, spoiler warning. But the reason why I didn't like this book is, first of all, well, it was well written generally, like it had a pretty writing style, so I guess that was a good thing. But aside from that, there was this weird Christian persecution storyline, which just gave me a lot of feelings of Christian persecution complex that, you know, a lot of American or North American Christians have, a lot of European Christians. Not that Christians aren't persecuted in some parts of the world, but, you know, not in Europe. And also, even within Europe, when there were still Christians being persecuted, it was usually other Christians doing the persecution. You know, like Protestants versus Catholics, the Huguenots. I don't know, is that how you say them in English? You know, where a bunch of them were just massacred in France in the 16th century, 17th century, I don't remember. But yeah, anyway, really weird Christian persecution complex storyline where Christians were, you know, taken in the middle of the night and just vanished, and it just felt a lot like being inspired by the, like, precursors to the Holocaust, where a lot of Jewish people vanished and, you know, were persecuted and were locked up for no reason, and, you know, then got worse, obviously. But yeah, it just, that part of the storyline I really didn't like. I don't get why this is shelved under LGBT, because for me it's more queer baiting rather than true queer representation. And with queer representation, of course, it's always, if you see yourselves in the characters, then that's completely fine for you. For me personally, it made me really uncomfortable because, and that's where I'll get into spoiler territory. Basically, you have these two timelines and you follow the same main character. One is in the past, where he is, well, going to this academy, and at the center of this academy is learning how to play the game, or le jeu, le beau jeu, something along those lines. I think, like, basically it's a game. We're never explained what this game is. It's a game. And he falls in love with one of his fellow students, who is a boy, or so he thinks, because the second timeline, he returns to this academy as an adult, and the headmaster or headmistress of this academy is now a woman for the first time. In the past it was only ever men, and it was only ever boys who were allowed to this school and so on. And now the headmaster is a woman, or the headmistress is a woman, and oh surprise, we find out that she is actually the boy that our main character fell in love with in the past. So, you know, it's like, it's gay. Except it's not. And of course there's a lot of times in these storylines there's the arguments of it's actually gay because it's like bisexuality and attracted to both genders or whatever. But to me personally, it didn't really feel like it was going that direction, but it was more like, oh wait, he actually didn't fall in love with a boy. He just felt that it was a girl underneath, and that's how the story came across to me. And then also, you know, with the whole gender swap thing, weird feminism storylines in there. And then a few weeks after I finished the book, which by the way I only picked it up as an accident because I thought it was a different book and I regret it so much. But a few weeks after I finished, and I was so, like, I felt so validated in my feelings about this book, I cannot tell you. But a few weeks after, Bridget Collins started liking transphobic tweets on, what's it called, on Twitter. So yeah, turf alert, but yeah, that's just an additional reason why I didn't like the book. And now the whole storyline with the boy actually being a girl, just, you know, feels a little different, doesn't it? I can't explain. I don't know if it comes across just from a quick summary, but the way I read the book, just a lot of things I remember after I heard that, a lot of things I remembered about the book and about the plot just made me very uncomfortable after that. So yeah, anyway, that was it for all the books that I didn't like, didn't enjoy my reading experience with in 2021. If you're really upset at me now, leave it in the comments down below. Also, if you just want to talk about my thoughts on any of the books, maybe go in depth on your thoughts on some of the books, leave them in the comments down below as well. If you enjoyed this video, maybe think about giving me a thumbs up and also maybe subscribing. All the links to my social media as well as to my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, where I read one adult high fantasy book written by a woman or genderqueer person per month, will be left linked down below, so go and check those out as well. And I hope I'll see you very soon. Bye!